thought about whether your child was or is being properly educated? There are different schools of thought around how children should be educated. What is not generally a part of that conversation is how to be inclusive in the process. Coming up next, our guests will discuss some of the tools to empower boys, more specifically, Black boys, from his book, Educating Black Boys Towards Excellence and Liberation, an African-Centered and Buddhist Approach. All this and more on Flying on Broken Wings. Stay with us.
Flying high, flying high, flying on broken wings. Flying high, flying high, flying on broken wings. I'm flying high, so high, flying on broken wings. I'm flying high, so high, flying on broken wings. I'm flying high, flying on broken wings.
Education is what saved me because I was fortunate enough to use it in equal parts as a weapon against and a shelter from a life I did not want. That declaration is not the case for many, which is where our focus will be in this conversation on Flying on Broken Wings. Today, we will be talking about education, educating Black boys in particular, and with us we have educator, author, entrepreneur, historian, father, husband, and more, Joshua Rosenbaum. Welcome to the show. Josh, tell us a little bit more about you in terms of the work that you are doing.
Well, I wrote this book because I was that Black boy. I can remember my experience sitting in a classroom and not seeing myself in anything. I was invisible. I remember in second grade, I was excellent in math. Both my parents were math teachers, but when it was time to do advanced work, I never got that opportunity. I actually got in trouble for talking because we would finish our math early and we had nothing else to do. I can remember going to junior high school and almost all of the Black kids were put into below classes. We had 3 levels. It was above, on, and below. One of my good friends was put in below. By high school, we called him genius because he loved reading so much. But all they saw was this Black boy. I can remember in 11th grade AP US history, we studied for about 2 weeks African American history. And every time there was a question, my teacher, he was an excellent teacher, but anytime there was a question about African people in America, he would look at me. And I would look back at him like, you're the teacher.
Right.
You know, you're supposed to help me. So spending, all this time and not seeing myself, eventually I hated school. I can remember saying that out loud in 10th grade. I hate school. I didn't want to be there because I didn't see myself in school. And I was an A student. I was an honor student. I had no choice because my parents were teachers. So I had to do it, but I didn't like it. And I know a big reason why I didn't like it is because they never put me in. So this is to speak for those Black boys and to say we have to be seen, we have to be empowered. And I know teachers want to do this, many teachers do, but I give them the tools through my book on how to approach really empowering Black boys. And it goes beyond just Black boys, but I say Black boys because we always score at the lowest levels. There's this, what they call this great achievement gap. And it will never be addressed if we don't really focus on a different approach to education.
And I like what you said about that different approach because we all know, you and I both are educators, and so we all know that there's more than one way to teach a child. And so if we continue to teach our Black boys and girls too in the way that we're doing, we are never going to reach them. because we're leaving out that most important element, which is actually the child, right? And we have to understand that when we're talking about children and educating them, we've got to be able to go right in there and find out what it is that really makes that child want to learn. You yourself said you hated school, yet you were a brilliant student. And so how does that happen, right? You are a brilliant student, but you hate school. That's a problem, and that's something that we, as educators, we have to try to figure out. And so you said in your book, you have the tools, you provide the tools for teachers, and that's a wonderful thing. So we're going to stay right there, and you've heard from Joshua. We're just getting started here, but you've heard some very powerful things, some very powerful information coming out. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about his book, about those tools, and everything else that goes along with educating black boys. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're here at Tiniest Footprints Early Learning Childhood Center in Clifton, New Jersey. I'm Dr. Phyllis Bivens Hudson from Flying on Broken Wings, and we're here today with our guest, Joshua Rosenbaum. Josh, welcome back too.
Thank you.
So, Joshua, in the introduction of your book, we begin with this quote: "For me, education is a revolutionary act. I believe that it is a grand opportunity to help bring forth the great potential in each individual. It is an opportunity for oppressed people to empower themselves, to ultimately and righteously seize power and transform our world into a place that values wisdom, compassion, and life over material gain." That is a very powerful quote, and that's at the very introduction of your book. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that quote really encapsulates the African-centered and Buddhist approach. A lot of people wonder how you can put those two together. But from an African-centered approach, you know, we have to understand that education is more than trying to educate black and brown children to just go into the workforce and support a system that really oppresses them and doesn't empower them. So I say, you know, our education should be about empowering our children to be self-determinative, to determine their own future, and also to bring about a type of culture that really values wisdom, that values compassion for other people, that's collective and not individualistic, and transforms our society from a society that's dominated by a few to a society where the collective is most important. And that's a very different approach to education. African-centered education values not only the history and challenges white supremacy and oppressive systems, but it values the culture, which is really, really important. You know, when we talk about Africa, we're talking about the first people on the earth, the first cultures, the first people to read, the first people to do mathematics, the first people to do science, the first universities, the first spiritual systems are coming out of Africa. There's great wisdom there, and we don't study it. We study everything else, every other culture, but we don't go into that place that has such a deep and rich history for culture, not only for African people, but for all people.
And let me stop you there for a minute. So you've said a lot, and everything you've said, it speaks to that quote. It's very powerful, but how do you think we get people, other people who haven't bought into this yet, to that place, because it's not just other people in the sense of Caucasians or Latinos or whomever. Our people as well have not bought into that. So how do you think we get everybody on board? And you may not have the answer, but tell us your thinking around that. How do you think we can start getting on board? That's one part of my question. And the second part is, when you start thinking about how we can all start getting on board, are those some of the tools that are offered in your book? So speak to us about that a little bit.
Well, first of all, yes, there's lots of tools in the book. But it really starts with a desire. If you want to see change, if you want to help black boys, black girls, all children, then there's work that we need to do. And it's consistent work. I'm still learning. I haven't stopped learning. So it's consistent. It's really recognizing that we have to take a different approach. And then two, where can I begin? One of the things I state in the book is you have to start studying African history and culture. And that has to be intentional. As an educator, you need to learn that. If I went to China to teach Chinese children, I would immerse myself in Chinese history and culture. So I could better relate to those children and better help them. Same thing for us.
And that's the problem. That's part of the problem, right? We're right here in this country where so much of our history has taken place in this country once we came over here. And yet we're still talking today in 2021, trying to get people to buy into the fact that we need to put that history in our history books. And we know that this history has happened because, as you said before, you went to school and you didn't find yourself in any of those books. And imagine, I went to school many, many years before you, so I wasn't represented. I think my the first moment that I felt good about something to do with history was when I saw Phyllis Sweetley. And of course, that's because we had the same namesake, right? So I get it. I understand what you're saying. But we need to figure out how we can get those tools that you're talking about into the right hands, because you're one person. Hopefully your book is going to be transcending in the sense that it will get into the hands of those people who really need to read it. And I say to my audience, if you have not gotten that book, you really, really need to do so, because it's an important piece of work that has been done and needs to be in the right hands. So continue. Did you want to continue with that? Because this is interesting. It's a very interesting topic.
Definitely. And just like things have changed. They're moving a lot of times in a better, there's some progress in education. But we're still bombarded with all these negative stereotypes, negative imagery, so many things. We don't even realize that it's going deep into our psyche. One of the quotes that I love from Malcolm X is, of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. Of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research.
Now say that one more time, looking at your audience. Tell your audience that.
Of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. Malcolm X.
Absolutely.
And that's what transformed his life. Because Malcolm was out there. Before he was Malcolm X, he was Malcolm Little. He was red. He was using drugs. He was pimping women. He was in prison. He was lost. And that study, I tell my students, Malcolm would read all through the night. And he knew exactly when the guards would pass. And that's when he would turn off his flashlight.
Wow.
So his reading helped to transform his life to be this really powerful human. He could have been stuck. The other thing I tell my students in 8th grade, he was close to being the top student. But when the teacher asked, what are you going to be? He asked, and Malcolm was the only black child there. He asked, all the white children responded, and every response they said, the teacher encouraged them. Malcolm said, I want to be a lawyer. you know, and the teacher said, Malcolm, ends can't be lawyers,
Wow.
you know, and from that point, you know, he went in a different direction.
Wow.
So we're losing our black boys, we're losing our girls, you know, and they're not living up to their fullest potential. So if we really want to help and support them as teachers, as educators, we need to do some work. We can't just do the same thing.
Right. So a conversation you and I were having off camera, I think fits right in here, and that is when you talk about what you've just discussed, we have to be intentional, don't we? Everything we do has to be intentional, because if we don't, then our kids are going to miss the boat. You know, many of us are already there, and while we don't have all the tools we necessarily need, we're supposed to be about the business of bringing the kids along, and if we're going to do that, we must be intentional about everything we do, even to the point that when we're talking to our colleagues, we have to be intentional about what we say to them, because we want everybody to know that there's an urgency here. One of the things that I talk to, I teach university students, and so these are teachers, people coming into the field now who already have degrees but coming into education. And one of the things that I say to them is, you know what, you have those children for 10 months. And in that 10 months, you need to treat it like it's an urgency, because that's all you have is 10 months to affect this child's life. But I'm smart enough to understand that on the flip side of that, that 10 months of urgency could also be used to damage a child, to do a lot of damage with a child. So when we think about that, and that whole urgency piece that I'm talking about, what do you think needs to be some things that teachers need to have in place, some tools that they need to have in place to help them move in that direction of being urgent or treating the children that they have with urgency? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, of course, I wrote the book as an introduction, you know, to really start opening up teachers to do better.
Yeah, so tell our audience again what the name of that book is.
Educating Black Boys Toward Excellence and Liberation, an African-Centered and Buddhist Approach.
Okay.
And, you know, that book contains 20 chapters. Each chapter you can read separately, or you can, of course, read the whole book in its entirety, or you can pick and choose whatever you need to address. And what it does is it gives you a foundation to build off of immediately, you know, wherever you are as a teacher. Just like we deal with our students, we try to meet them where they are and build from there. And it's about constant growth. And if we have that urgency, we're going to put in an effort. We're going to put that effort in. We're not going to go through the same things again and again, knowing that that doesn't work, knowing that that's not helping our children. So,
Yeah, so that means also that it's going to take more than just you and me or our colleagues, right? We have to have everybody on board, all stakeholders, including parents, administrators, community members, anybody who really cares and are concerned about our children, these children who are being lost and getting more and more lost every year. So that being the case, how do you think we can do that? How do you propose we get those other people, the other stakeholders on board with us?
yeah, I mean, again, it's one at a time. And the real number one point that we have to agree upon is that this system as it is not working. We want something better. And we as a collective can make that happen. And for me as an educator, I believe a lot of that can come through education. And I think it's not only educating children, it's educating adults. I'm well read, but I continue to learn. And as I learn, I open up. And the purpose of my learning is to really help liberate all people.
Okay, so let's stop right there. When we return, we're going to talk more with Joshua, and this time we're going to be talking about culturally relevant pedagogy. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're here at Tiniest Footprints Early Learning Childhood Center here in Clifton, New Jersey. And we're with Joshua Rosenbaum, and we are talking about educating black boys. Clearly, there needs to be some clarity around what culturally relevant pedagogy is. So, Joshua, why don't you define that for us in your terms? We know that there is the term for it, but we want you to give us your definition of what that is.
Yeah, culturally relevant pedagogy for me, there's a whole lot in there. There's a lot of nuance. I think people take it at its word value and say culturally relevant. So they're looking at the culture, the historical culture, and that's about the limit of the understanding of culturally relevant pedagogy. You know, but really, I think the people who have done the work, like Dr. Latson Billings, really they say a little bit more. And when they're talking about culturally relevant pedagogy, they're not only talking about the historical culture, but they understand that culture is always something that is dynamic. So when we're looking at our young people's culture, there's dynamic levels to that culture, how it has transformed and changed over time, and we're meeting them where they are. We're also, you know, Dr. Latson Billings is very clear about stating, like I do, that the purpose of culturally relevant pedagogy is to challenge oppression. So we're not just going to say, oh, let's celebrate this, and I think that's its base level. You know, let's celebrate, like I believe October's Hispanic month. September is, okay? Are we going to just celebrate the diverse cultures of Latino people? That's wonderful, but we also have to challenge some of the oppression that goes along with that, and we also have to meet the kids where they are to make it real, and then move them from that point to something further. I would also state that when we think about pedagogy, we're going beyond just content, and we're saying we're going to teach in a different way. And you know, for me, I say African-centered because I'm focusing on African people, black boys in particular, African boys in particular, and there's a rich history and wisdom and culture around that, and it's not only what we teach, but how we teach.
Okay, so stop right there for a minute. So now you mentioned that African-centered and Buddhist approach, and then we're also talking about culturally relevant pedagogy. So clearly there's that dichotomy there, right? And so those people who look at this think one is one thing and one is the other, but tell us how you intersect the two. What is there that makes you want to put those two together and make them work for us?
Yeah, I think that's always going to be a question. How do you put African-centered and Buddhist? Why do you do that? Why don't you just call it African-centered, or why don't you just call it Buddhist? You know, for me, African-centered, again, I'm focusing on African boys. So I'm focusing on that rich culture.
Okay, but stop now. You know, we're gonna have some Christians out there,
of course,
who are gonna say, yeah, but you put the Buddhism in there. So how are you gonna deal with that? Because we want everybody on board to help our children, right?
Yes.
So how do you deal with that?
And when I say Buddhism, I think there's universal principles within that that we could all use as educators. There's a concept in Buddhism that says you're one with the environment. And teachers understand this whether they understand that terminology or not. You know, you can have one group of students, one class, go into one teacher's class, you know, and they're crazy, doing all sorts of things.
Yes, we know about that, right?
Right? They're going to the next teacher's class, same group of students, well behaved, engaged. And there's a difference. And those two teachers could be teaching the same lesson. They could be using a similar pedagogical approach, but one has a life condition that's different, and it's something that's intangible. So in Buddhism, there's something intangible within your whole being that connects with students.
So now you know Christians are not going to call that Buddhism.
No,
right?
and that's okay.
Okay, so how do you get past that though? How do you get past the fact that they're going to say, no, that's not Buddhism. That's just God, the God in us. So how do you do that?
And that's fine. And that's something I do say. I say you can call it whatever you want. I'm calling it Buddhism because the word Buddha just means enlightened. It means awakened.
And at the end of the day, it's about doing what we need to do for children, right?
For instance, when I look at you, a Christian woman, you are also a Buddha because you're enlightened, you're awakened, and that's why people respond to you in that way. They're responding to your high life condition. That's what our students respond to. So I can say, you know, there's a whole bunch of different ways to create a high life condition. I know for a fact that for me, when I practice Buddhism, I can create a high life condition. I also know that, again, many of these terms are universal. For example, in Buddhism, we look at every single child and we see a Buddha, someone who has potential to bring out great wisdom, great compassion. We don't separate and say, no, this one is a Buddha, that one is not. A similar kind of thinking would be in Christian, we're all children of God. But do you really believe that? You know, as a teacher, we see certain children who give us challenges and we're like, that's not a child of God. You know, that's not a Buddha. But really, Buddhism says you don't look outside yourself, you look within. So anything in your environment is a reflection of your own karma. And therefore, if you want to change the environment, you start changing yourself.
Okay, so now let's stop there for a moment. So what do you say to the educator who says, oh, okay, so Joshua, I've really bought into everything that you're saying. But you know, in the classroom, we can't teach Christianity. And so in the classroom, we also can't teach Buddhism, about Buddhism, right? What do you say to the educator who says that to you?
Well, one, we're not teaching that. It is raising your life condition. In Buddhism, they call it human revolution. So to transform your environment, and for teachers, our classroom, we really want to transform that space, you know, to be peaceful and engaging. We have to start transforming our own inner world. And we're starting to see some of that happen. We're starting to see, you know, this big push for social emotional learning, mindfulness that's entering. All I would say is Nichiren Buddhism really goes straight at that and is based on actual proof. So when you apply it or apply some of the concepts, you'll see right away if it's helping you or not. And that's what it's about. Because really, we want to be able to reach our toughest students.
Right.
And our toughest students, they're the ones who are telling us, this is your karma. You know, so in Buddhism, we say this is an opportunity to change ourselves. We know that there's a part of us that's like, man, I wish this kid did not come in today.
Of course.
You know,
but that's the one that's always there, right?
Maybe, right. Those kids are coming every single day.
Not gonna miss a moment.
So either you're gonna face the challenge head on and use it as an opportunity to change and make a dynamic, powerful relationship with that child, or you're gonna keep running. And we know if we're dealing with black boys, we have to connect with them in a way that goes beyond our intellect, that goes right into our hearts. And we have to figure out a way to make it happen. So that's why I integrate both, because it's a tool.
Right.
It's a tool. And again, I know some people may be hesitant, and that's okay. And I say, you know, you can either embrace it completely, or you just take whatever you need to help you to do better by these children.
Okay, so we're going to stop right there to do better by these children. What a great, great, great way to think about how we educate our children. So it was great having you on the show. The exciting thing is that you're coming back for a part 2. So we're excited about that. So folks, thank you for joining in with us for part 1. We will be back with part 2. Until then, keep flying on your own wings.
Ooh,